We often talk about how the advancement of liberty is a marathon and not a sprint. That if progressive ideas were fast fashion, then what we are more Brooks Brothers. We are always relevant, if maybe a little less exclamatory. Well, if we needed a marathoner in that Brooks Brothers outfit to be an organization, Mercatus Center at George Mason University would fit that bill very nicely. It is built to think about free market ideas over the long term, how they adapt to society, how we should be thinking about them, how we can advance them, most importantly of all. And it has been around since 1980 with the very sexy, appealing name of Center for the Study of Market Processes. It has evolved over the years to the Mercatus Center and evolved in its programs and touches so much, almost too much now. And we're going to unpack some of those different things and try to understand what it is that Mercatus is doing to keep the free market flame alive in so many different areas. And to help me do that, I have Ben Klutsey, who is the executive director of the Mercatus Center, he's been here for 12 years, I believe, but took over as executive director last year. And we are thrilled to have him as we unpack everything that is Mercatus. So thank you for being here, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I have known Mercatus since I came into the Liberty movement in 2005. And yet, as I was thinking about this, part of the reason I wanted to do this discussion is as much as I know Mercatus, and of course, Mercatus, it does all these things. It's so great. It does academics work. It has a talent pipeline. It does research. It's engaging in neat things like emergent ventures, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And yet, to boil that down to a simple thing is very complicated. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you boil that down? What is the unifying theory of the Mercatus Center?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, and it is true, Mercatus is involved firmly in the ideas business, or you might say the ideas industry. And that's why we talk about bridging the gap between theory and practice. And so in the ideas industry and ideas business, we care a lot about liberty, the ideas that are connected to liberty. But it's not enough to just talk about ideas. I think we can talk about the ideas that emerged from Adam Smith to Vernon Smith, as we like to say, wonderful economists. But the question is, so what? What does that mean for people's lives? What does that mean for people going through all kinds of things in the world, whether they're starting a business or they're launching some kind of endeavor, they're innovating. What do these ideas mean for them? And so the way that we think about what we do is that talent is the conveyor of those ideas to real world problems. That's why our logo is the bridge, to bridge that gap between theory and practice, between the world of ideas and real world problems. And like I said, talent, people, they are the most important asset we have when it comes to conveying ideas and bridging that gap between ideas and real world problems. And so we like to invest in ideas. I like to say that we train and equip classical liberal change makers if we want to win when it comes to the debate, the competition for ideas.
You think about that bridge. A few weeks ago, I was talking to Sam Gregg of AIER, and similarly wants to take ideas out to the masses. That I think they would say they're building bridges, to the common man. Essentially, I think that's long been their goal. Is that the goal here, or is it a little more high-minded? Particularly being aware that you're affiliated to a university, which we should talk about as well. But who is the audience for that bridge? Who's on the other side of that bridge?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a set of audiences. Academia is one that our scholars are talking to their peers in the academy. We believe that we need the intellectual raw material for how change happens. And so those engagements around what the raw material is happening in academia. And so we want to make sure that we're talking to our peers. The policy environment is really important when, they're struggling to figure out what kinds of policy ideas, or even help critiquing what policies might be helpful or detrimental. We want to be available to people who want to learn about those things. Audiences include students. Being within the university, we engage students a lot. And so we want to make sure that students understand these ideas as well, and that as they are coming up in their educational programs, they think about ways in which these ideas can make a difference in the real world. So we speak to multiple audiences, and our goal is to continue to do that.
The policy piece of that, how much of a focus is that? Because that kind of puts you more in think tank territory. I don't think of Mercatus as a think tank. It's really, we could go back years and talk about the structure of production and the ideas level and the policy level and the action level. But how much of that policy work do you see Mercatus really doing? How much of that kind of think tanky stuff, or is it really staying more? Is that a tertiary audience to the longer term stuff of academia and students?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that we do policy work, I think of it as educational, right? It's really part of the effort to make the academic ideas real. Like I said, being in the university setting, it means that we are spending a lot of time thinking about, theory. What did Adam Smith mean by division of labor? What does it mean to make trade-offs? All these are important questions, but people need to understand how these things make an impact on the ground. And so our role is to continue to be educators, not only when people are in school, but when people are, trying to make policy or trying to make a difference in the world. So sometimes the nomenclature isn't the most helpful, but I think that we are engaged in the ideas business and in the education business to really try to, help people understand. Hayek has this wonderful quote that is like, the ideas of economics, or actually it's the curious task of economics, right, is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. And so a lot of the time, we play a role of educating people to understand that you have to be a lot more humble about what you think that you can design around, policies and the economy and things like that, because we really need a lot of humility.
We need a lot of humility, especially as DC is about to get a Democratic Socialist mayor, and we have one in New York, and we have one in Seattle, and there's a lot of lack of humility in the political class right now. But to put that another way, I guess you would say, not the humility piece, but the policy piece, that if there's a housing reform bill before Congress, Mercatus' interest isn't in that bill per se. It is making sure that the broader ideas of why you would create such a bill in the first place is being focused on. Is that fair?
That's right. We don't lobby. We're not, we're not an advocacy organization, but we want to really make sure that you're connecting the dots on what does it really mean to advance human flourishing. And so long as it leads to a situation where people are living freer and more flourishing lives, we think it's positive. But we're not in the business of writing bills and doing all those things. We produce research, we engage in discussing and debating ideas, and our goal is to help people to understand the real world impacts of what they're trying to accomplish.
So we're going to get into some of those real world impacts, but first we'll tickle the fancy of folks who are keen on economics and wonky stuff. So I've always kind of considered Mercatus as part of the Austrian school, comes out of University of Chicago and that kind of particular brand. I am no expert in exactly how to define Austrian school, but talk to us about the intellectual DNA of Mercatus. I mean, free market is a pretty broad way of saying it because there's different flavors, even just a free market. How would you put it? Who's the Mount Rushmore of the Mercatus pantheon?
Yeah, so we like to think of the framework that we sort of use to think through these types of questions about ideas as a toolkit. And we have the Austrian school as one leg of the toolkit. And the Austrian school, I used to think that the Austrian school meant that you had to go to Austria to study what the Austrian school was. But it turns out that there are a set of economists who came from Austria, who were really focused on understanding, ideas related to liberty. And so Friedrich Hayek is one of them. He was taught by Ludwig von Mises, but there were others as well, like Karl Menger and others, who spent a lot of time thinking about, classical liberalism, broadly speaking, and the role that freedom plays in advancing human flourishing. A lot of these ideas also come from Adam Smith, right? So there's a long tradition of these ideas, but that's one, and that's really especially when we're talking about markets. I mean, the reason why Mercatus is called Mercatus is that it's Latin for markets, and we really care about understanding markets, how markets advance human innovation, how they advance human flourishing, and so it's important for us to study that. But over time, we've developed and deepened our thinking around markets. We learned that there are institutions that are important for us to think about. And so when James Buchanan got the Nobel Prize in the 90s, um, that happened while he was at Mercatus. And so we developed the public choice school, right? It really helps you understand institutions in the sort of public policy arena, the role of policymakers acting as self-interested individuals. That's important for us to understand if you want to understand how you go from ideas to real-world impact. And then the third leg of the stool is the Bloomington School. Elena Ostrom, who was a political scientist, became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. Studied also institutions, but what she calls polycentric institutions. That's local, kind of bottom-up ways to solve problems across the country, across communities, across societies. And so it's a set of institutions that we spend a lot of time thinking about and studying. And if we really want to kind of boil it down, it's about the promise of markets. It's about the limits of the state and the limits of government. And it's also the promise and opportunity for bottom-up solutions to problems. And when you pull all these things together, we think of them as sort of the mainline political economy tradition, the toolkit. It's yes, partly Austrian economics, but it's also the Virginia School or the Buchanan School, and it's also partly the Bloomington School or the Ostrom School.
Okay, so that's actually very enlightening for a non-wonk like me to see that there is the wonky piece of the Austrian school, but coupled with that importance of institutions, how do you do things? And then by what means, that bottom up Ostrom school, by what means do those things happen? And then you combine those together and you get a theory of change. Okay, well, we're done here. I get it. I understand. Okay, so let's talk about talent. Let's talk about the talent pipeline. You do a lot with students. You do a lot with academics. I generally think of that as the economic students. I think you yourself came up kind of through that, one of those programs, right? So, yeah, so talk to me about the work you're doing to create another generation that isn't Mondami and isn't the mayor of Seattle.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned generation, because I think that's really what we worry about. Right, Tyler calls our current moment a period of the great forgetting.
Tyler Cowen, for those who don't know him, although everyone I imagine listening probably does know him.
Right, the great forgetting, that people are forgetting the ideas that inform the founding of this country, the ideas that inform how markets, lead to human flourishing, the value of trade, and all these other things that are so critical if we want to advance human prosperity. It's really amazing to think that, over 250 years ago, and we're about to mark the 250th anniversary of America, that most of the world's population, I'd say 90% of the world's population, lived on less than $2 a day. And now it's flipped, right? Only 10% or less of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. And it's because of these ideas that made a difference. But we're going through the great forgetting. People have taken these things for granted. And we are one organization that's, I think, uniquely positioned to be asking this question systematically, that how can we play an important role in the formation of, the young generation who are coming up. So it's not a question of the quick policy brief or the working paper, but it's how do we over time develop the kinds of people who will be foundationally developed in these ideas and can make the case and can become change makers across our society. And so that's the majority of the work that we do is in this space. And we are training students from undergraduate level to the PhD level We're training sort of non-traditional people that are not necessarily in an academic program, but we're apprenticing them through our research work and our policy work to also develop these ideas and begin to become great communicators of ideas, great scholars.
And is that training them just to create a bunch of economics teachers, or what fields do you hope these people go into? Where are they leading?
Well, it varies and it depends on the talent. I mean, we imagine that people who come through Mercatus programs will end up becoming professors at universities in different parts of the country or the world. Some will end up becoming entrepreneurs. Some will end up becoming, policy scholars and policy analysts. Some may end up, working for the government. But regardless of which institution that you're touching, the goal is that you have a pretty good sense of the foundational ideas. Like I said, the toolkit that will help you and hopefully will make you a lot more humble about, what you think that, these systems, Adam Smith talks about the man of system, thinks that they can regulate everything. Right. And we want people to be a lot more humble. And so when you've come through Mercatus programs and Mercatus, trainings, you're stronger and you're multifaceted. It's the way that I like to think about it.
How much do you talk about? I mean, you've kind of alluded to some American values, but when I think of Mercatus, I think economics. I think of Smith and Mises and these people who are not even Americans necessarily,
Yeah, that's
right?
right.
But you've referenced the Great Forgetting, these types of things. How much, in terms of these training programs, do you actually talk about the Americanness of some of this versus the economicness of this?
Yeah, no, it's we spend a lot of time, talking about that. I mean, our training programs, people study Tocqueville, for instance, right? And Tocqueville spend a lot of time in America, going across cities and states and talking about what is unique about America. So we certainly do have lots of conversations about what's happening in America right now, but it's not removed from what's happening globally as well. We take lessons from the Mont Pelerin Society, which was formed in 1947. And it was 39 people, including Mises, including Hayek, including Milton Friedman, Frank Knight, and others, who realized that in the aftermath of World War II, the world was grappling with fascism and socialism and all the isms that are detrimental to advancing a liberal society. And they decided that, we're going to pull together a group of people who are smart but proactive and entrepreneurial and care about ideas. And we're going to start working on how we build this back up. And so oftentimes when we talk to, people here, we're saying this is an important tradition. America is an important part of it, but it's really a global effort, and that we have to think about the larger context as well. And obviously what happens in America, it does inform what happens across the world. And so it's yes, and it's really both.
Well, and the economic system is part of what makes America so great. It's part of the experiment that was so critical that is easy to overlook. And then there's lots of great organizations, particularly this year, that are talking about the American founding and all that. But it is a lot of them, I think, give short shift to the American or to the economic portions of this that mattered and informed Jefferson and Adams and all of them. So I'm curious, from a generational change. I mean, you went through one of these programs, 15, 20 years ago?
About 20 years ago, yeah, I went through a public policy program.
So, you've, I mean, 20 years is kind of a generation. How different is it? Obviously, when we were younger, everything was better. But how different is it from when you went through it in terms of the kids coming through versus today? Lots of people are worried about, the Gen X, or I mean, not Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Alpha rising up. What differences are you seeing? Or are you seeing things that actually make you optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, there are reasons to be optimistic, and there are reasons to be, worried. I think this generation has seen a number of issues and crises. We're talking about the financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and go way back before that, we had sort of the war on terror and a whole host of things that have made them very skeptical when we talk about, free markets and things like that. And whereas, we say, look, it's important to know that freedom is important, and we have to work as hard as possible to preserve the freedoms we have in America. They also sometimes think that maybe government can address a lot of these problems, even though government has created so many other problems.
So I think that skepticism can work both ways, right? It can actually work in our favor because they're
Yes.
skeptical of government too.
Yes, for sure.
Or pat answers just generally.
Yeah. So you do have both things, but the challenge is when people say, well, you need stronger because it wasn't robust enough, and so it needs to be stronger, right? And I think that's the challenge that we face. But it's I think every generation goes through these things. We have our work cut out for us. There's a lot of opportunity because I think that entrepreneurship is a pathway. What I see with young people, with the innovations and technologies that we have, is that you can be a solopreneur, and I see a lot of them taking advantage of this opportunity now with AI and all these tools. You can run your own business. You can be as entrepreneurial as possible, and I think that's a path for us to have some serious conversations with a lot of young people about how we can build a stronger society.
So speaking of stronger society and people coming together, you actually started a program here on pluralism and civil society that you were doing before you stepped into the executive director role. That was kind of created by you. You created that program. So where does this is a sexy topic right now, bridging divides, figuring out how we get different sides to talk to each other. Sometimes I think people boil that down to some kind of mushy something. Why is that idea of pluralism important to the work of Mercatus? And frankly, broadly, because I think there's actually a lot of more conservative donors who are skeptical of some of this bridge building, not because they don't want to have a civil Thanksgiving, but it's just like, what's the end? What's the goal here?
Yeah, a lot of it was almost like a demonstration effect. Like we wanted to demonstrate that it was possible to have difficult conversations, even from a free market perspective, from a classical liberal perspective. But we got really frustrated, I think, going into late 2019, early 2020, when, this sort of pandemic was emerging. And then you had all these protests and all of these things. And what we were seeing was just labeling and dismissing people, even when people had great ideas to have conversations on. And as I said, Mercatus is Latin for markets, and we care about, the marketplace for goods and services. But the marketplace of ideas is even more important. That's where innovation comes from. And to the extent that the marketplace of ideas had been oriented towards conflict and discord, we thought that there was a role for classical liberalism to help reorient things back towards civility and mutual engagement, mutual forbearance, and that kind of thing. And it was very interesting. I mean, we learned a great deal, and that continues to inform how we engage with people across divides and differences. And we learned that, look, you can actually engage people with respect, but you have, with authenticity and with curiosity. And once you're willing to do that, you can get some really productive engagements going.
Now, when you say we learned a great deal, though, that could also be a euphemism for we didn't solve it. So, what?
For sure.
I'm guessing we didn't solve it.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's not a problem that only one organization can solve. But I think looking at a number of organizations that are now stepping forward and getting involved in this whole issue of polarization, I'm filled with a lot of hope. And one of the things we realize actually from doing this work is that we are actually overestimating how extreme the other side is, and that the extreme extremes, I should say, on both sides, are no more than, say, 14% or so of the population, and that most Americans want to be able to have good conversations, work together, and they're part of what More in Common calls the exhausted majority. And so we went across the country from Pittsburgh to Phoenix to Atlanta and having conversations with regular Americans on everything from sort of free market ideas to people who push back and from more socialist perspectives and so on. Like, no, it's possible to have these conversations, and sometimes you can actually convince people and draw them to your side when you are not trying to convince them, right?
Nobody likes to be convinced.
Right, exactly.
But they like to be talked to like normal people.
Right. And so that made me very, very hopeful. And that's where I get my inspiration from in terms of seeing, younger people, because we did this with college students as well, going across campuses from, Fargo, North Dakota to Tallahassee, Florida. And you have students who are like, you know what, I think markets are useful. I think that capitalism is fairly positive because I think I want to, pursue some entrepreneurial endeavors. And we help them think about ways in which sometimes a regulatory apparatus can restrain that. And those end up being incredibly powerful conversations. So that's what makes me hopeful.
And you, not the campus piece, but some of those other conversations were documented in a film called Undivide Us that you did with State Policy Network. And I saw that. And, some of those conversations in that film are not pleasant. I mean, they're hard conversations, but I don't think anybody decked anybody. I think you got through it all right, even when there were the moments where you're sitting there uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. There were certainly some very, very tense moments. But the bits that surprised me the most were the parts at the end when the cameras were off, when we had stopped facilitating, when people were just didn't want to stop the conversations. We're exchanging emails and phone numbers because it almost was like a cathartic experience where they never get the chance to talk to people across differences. And that's the challenge we have, is that we are so siloed into our own sort of echo chambers and camps. Once we begin to break that, I think that leads to some really positive outcomes.
I'm curious. I mean, you have a fascinating personal history, and if I can indulge and touch on that for a second, because I do wonder how much of that personal history fed into just your interest here. I mean, for the listeners, you grew up in Ghana in an authoritarian age when your father said don't talk outside these walls about politics, not because it's just impolite, but because it's dangerous. It's actually dangerous. And then a scenario that so few people get, that is flipped, and all of a sudden you're a market economy and you can talk freely and you have these freedoms that you did not have before. When that switch flipped, did all of a sudden you see some of this kind of pluralistic conversation of, oh yeah, well, I never really believed that, right? I mean, what were the conversations like then, and how did they influence you?
Oh, I mean, first of all, it's just a lot of ideas that I had that I never got the chance to sort of engage on and have conversations about. I now began to do that. And so you learn a lot, right? John Stuart Mill says that a lot of the ideas that we hold on so dearly, they become dead dogma if we don't, challenge, get pushback. And that's how we learn more about even why we hold on to these things. And so that it was a process, right? It was being in an academic setting where, you had professors and teachers who encouraged you to get into what he called bull sessions, right? Like you have to get into these bull sessions and argue and discuss. And that's how you truly learn. And so for me, it was a process. And so when I go across campuses and I talk to students, a lot of the time I say, you have something really special here in America. You have to work really hard so you don't lose it, because liberalism is the kind of thing that you take for granted until it's gone. And having lived in both societies, a society where you don't have free speech, you don't have economic freedoms and so on, to a society where you have everything in spades, basically, but you work really, really hard to constrain that. And I think that's part of the great forgetting challenge that we face. And so my goal, and within Mercatus across the board, all of our scholars and those who are involved in training students and in our fellowship programs and so on have this ethos where they're engaging with students who may not have encountered any of these ideas before in very respectful ways, because that's how people learn. You engage them with ideas and you show them that it's okay to challenge, it's okay to be curious, but it's more important. It's also important to be authentic, and it's been great.
Switching gears a little slightly, you have this affiliation with George Mason University. You always have. It's always been actually a very important piece of it. In fact, your money used to flow through it. Now you have your own C3. But what does that do for you?
Yeah, we've been incredibly fortunate to be within George Mason, to be partnered with George Mason University, and in fact, our growths have kind of tracked, right? So we've grown as George Mason University has also grown, and we benefit from great credibility being within the university. We have access to remarkable scholars and researchers within George Mason University. We have access to great students who participate in our programs, our fellowships from undergraduate level to the PhD level. And so, and being part of George Mason University also helps us to become, to be better with this liberal ethos, where the university is the place where you get to sort of disagree together, right? And so we're in an environment where we have to have viewpoint diversity. We have to engage across differences. And so that's been really helpful, being part of, and George Mason University is one of the most diverse universities in the country. And so you really learn to kind of navigate, this sort of amazing institution with different perspectives, different backgrounds. And I think it's made us a much stronger organization than we would have been.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's okay. So before we wrap up, I want to make sure we talk about some of the almost more practical things that you all do. I mean, yes, student training is pretty practical, but it's long term. But there's this program called Emergent Ventures that kind of came around in the COVID era, I believe, gets money to some entrepreneurs in a very fast, quick way. How does it tie into what you're doing here? And give a better description than what I just gave.
No, I think it's a great way to describe that. And you remember when I mentioned that talent is the best asset we have when it comes to the marketplace of ideas and the competition or ideas. And so the way that Emergent Ventures works is to identify high agency, proactive entrepreneurial people who are engaged in projects that range from starting a nonprofit to, doing research, to the extent that they have high value in advancing, social change in a very positive way. We want to support it. And so it's a really important way for us to identify great talent, because we think that there's just talent so much more out there beyond what our current networks can access. And so Emergent Ventures gives us that opportunity, that latitude to be able to engage great talent.
And what kind of talent? I mean, those are entrepreneurs. Those are people starting companies or starting nonprofits, or
all across the board.
Across the world too.
Yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. We don't discriminate at all. From sort of the interest of the talent. It's like they have to pursue a project they care deeply about. They think they can make some great change with that project. Like I said, sometimes it's research, sometimes it's starting a nonprofit, sometimes it's starting a think tank, and that we find that that's sort of the best way. It kind of leans into sort of the bottom up way, of addressing social change. As I mentioned, we saw the Ostromian approach to sort of bottom up things. And so you find and support talent that way.
Do you have a metric for success there? Do you follow up with people? Do you I mean, is it kind of like venture capital where you just expect 60% to fail, but the 40% that succeed are going to be awesome?
That's the approach. But we believe that when they're successful, you hear about them. And they do, have to send us, every year, a written document about, how they're doing, what they're doing. It's very, very short and brief, so it's not overly taxing. But, you hear about them. You hear about, Dorcas Patel, who has probably the most important podcast on AI, where he's brought on people like Mark Zuckerberg and some of the most influential people on AI to have important conversations about the impacts of AI, right? And there are a whole host of these kinds of people doing phenomenal work. Like, someone is starting a podcast, but someone is doing a research and starting a nonprofit. So it does vary widely. And so I understand sometimes it might be confusing, but it's all in the effort of identifying incredible talent. And what happens with that identification is that it raises the aspirations that there's something special that they could do with that support, and with that they become part of a network, of sort of the Mercatus network, and so you're connected to some great classical liberal scholars who can help you in your ideas formation and things like that.
So even though it's something that seems like it's a fast
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal, and it is, I mean, the money goes out fast, but
Yeah.
it's still a long-term bet. It
Yes.
still fits into that marathon, not a sprint
That's
type
right.
piece, because you're seeding this bit of talent,
Exactly.
even the ones that fail, I
Yeah.
suppose, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, failure is the best way for us to learn. And we shouldn't expect that we will always succeed, every single time. But, we believe in markets, right? And we believe that markets are a good way for us to learn that whatever it is that we're doing is succeeding or not succeeding. And so, the people who will start a project and that project actually changes to something else from what they started out to do.
Yeah,
So,
no, this is good. I mean, we at Donors Trust just announced some new fund that we did, a couple new funds, but one of them's focused on getting fast capital to more think tanks, nonprofit type things that need that catalyzation to move forward. And we've taken some inspiration from what you all have done with Emergent Venture on that, and probably need to learn more about how you're judging some of these things as we go about it. All right, so let's close talking about the donor perspective in all this. So many donors think, it sounds negative and I don't mean it this way, but like think in short term, right? They're sucked into the political environment. That's the noise they're hearing. They need to see wins. We all want to see wins. Your product that you're selling is a much longer term gain. You're saying we're going to win in 30 years, 20 years, even 10 years seems too far away. How do you talk about that to donors? How do you help them really appreciate the need to invest in these long time horizon idea generating things that Mercatus does?
yeah. And I get it, right? We all want to see results very, very quickly. And sometimes the volatility, the news, and how sensational things are reported, they do show that things are dire, and that we need to react very, very quickly. My caution is, we ask the question, who's going to be the next Hayek? Who's going to be the next Friedman? Who's going to be the next Walter Williams? And if you look at the talent pipeline, we see the challenges there. They are thinning out. And we have to do double our efforts to replenish that. And so the question we ask is not the next 5 years, which is going to be important. But we got to think about, next 10 years, the next 15 years, the next 20 years. We need to have the kinds of people who are trained and developed in the foundational ideas of what a free society is and how a free society is sustained. And that requires time. You can't produce talent like you produce a product, but talent has to be cultivated and engaged. And sometimes the talent remains dormant for a while until you begin to see them do remarkable work. And so that's what we are encouraging folks to think about when they think about Mercatus, that, we require that kind of patient capital that will support people from the early stages of their career as scholars, thinkers, academics, and so on, because they're going to be the ones who make an impact, 20 years down the road. And they do make some difference now, right? Sometimes it's we don't hear all the noise about what they're doing, but they do make a difference when they're called up to do a briefing and they're called up to have a conversation.
Or just political wind shift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Overton window,
Yeah.
you look at your home country of Ghana, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
you needed people to jump in and be able to actually articulate even if they weren't expecting it, how these free market ideas work.
Right. And some of them are teaching students right now who will, 10 years from now, will learn the lessons that are being taught by those professors and say, I need to incorporate these ideas in the way that, I'm building policy, or I'm developing my organization, or what have you. And so that's just the real, if we're really thinking about the long-term sustainability of these ideas for human flourishing, we need to spend time and effort and resources developing that next generation. And sometimes we have to resist um, the discouragement that comes from looking at what's happening, around the world right now, and say, look, we're doing something that will make sure that things are sustainable the long term.
Well put. Ben Klutsey, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I appreciate Ben joining me and helping me better understand Mercatus Center. As I said at the top, I've known Mercatus a long time, but it does a lot of things. It's hard to get your head around all of it, other than knowing that it's a long-term game. It's really thinking, how do we get these economic principles to outlast us, outlast this generation, and to continue carry forward? And his description of that three-legged stool of coming together of the economic theory with the institutions and then the bottom-up change action really helps solidify my understanding of what it really means to build these bridges. And it's fascinating stuff, important stuff, long-term stuff that's hard to focus on, and yet so needed, because when the moment comes, we have to have these ideas ready to go. Well, I appreciate you tuning in for this, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening. We will be back with another great episode soon. But if we can help you in the meantime at Donors Trust, we are always happy to do that. If you care about ideas over the long term or in the short term, there are many, many great organizations out there that you can use your charitable dollars to support. And we at Donors Trust would be thrilled to help you simplify your giving, do it in a tax-efficient way, and put those dollars to use to really make an impact for your ideas and values. Well, we look forward to talking to you again soon. Until then, thank you for being a giver. We'll talk more soon.